Chapter 3 Missing. Andrea screamed as the glass Cinderella slipper hit the hardwood floor. But the slipper didn't break. Gregory giggled. What's the big deal? It's not real glass. Gregory, Mr. McGuire said angrily. Don't ever do that again. What? Gregory said innocently. It was a joke. The slippers are not actually glass, Mr. McGuire explained to the rest of the class. They are made of a certain kind of see-through plastic that looks like glass. He glared at Gregory. Still, never do that again. These slippers are from a very special store in Paris. If anything happened to them, we wouldn't be able to replace them in time for the show. Yes, Mr. McGuire, Gregory said. He hung his head sheepishly. Andrea's face had turned ghostly white. She picked up the slipper and gave it back to Miss Zelda. Miss Zelda returned the shoe to the tissue-filled box. She frowned at Gregory and hurried away. Gregory's jokes are getting to be way too extreme, George whispered to Nancy. Nancy nodded. Okay, that's enough excitement for today. Let's get started on the pumpkin coat scene, Miss McGuire called out. Everyone scrambled to their places, including Nancy. She closed her eyes for a moment so she could think about her part. The pumpkin scene was super tricky. On Saturday, during the real performance, she and Nadine would start the scene dressed in mice costumes. When Beth, the fairy godmother, waved her magic wand, the two girls would change into coach drivers. In reality, Nancy and Nadine would hide behind some fake bushes for a second and slip out of their mice costumes. Underneath, they would be dressed as coach drivers. In the same scene, Andrea would change from a servant girl into a beautiful princess. Her costume switch was trickier. Nancy knew that Andrea would have to practice it lots of times before she got it right, just right. Here we go, everyone, Mr. McGuire said. Clapping his hands, he turned on the CD player. When the music began to play, Nancy pretended to be a little mouse. She curved her hands in front of her chest as though they were tiny paws. She began dancing lightly on her feet, like she was scurrying across the floor in search of cheese. Nadine was right behind her, doing the same thing in exact time to the music. Beth was off in the corner, dancing merrily with Andrea. Then Beth and Andrea crossed the floor with a series of graceful leaps. Just as they passed Nancy and Nadine, Nadine did a tendu, sticking her right foot out. Andrea tripped on Nadine's foot, and fell to the floor. Ow! Andrea cried out. Mr. McGuire stopped the music. What's going on? He demanded. Nadine tripped me, Andrea said. She sat up and brushed dust from her shorts and leotard. I did not, Nadine protested. It was an accident. I was doing my tendu. You are supposed to do a tendu there. You are not supposed to do a tendu there, Nadine, Miss McGuire told her sternly. You are supposed to do a boulier. Nadine shrugged. Oh, sorry. Nancy frowned. Was Nadine telling the truth? Or had she tripped Andrea on purpose? Smile, everyone! Click. Nancy whirled around. Deirdre was standing nearby, holding her camera. She had taken a picture of Andrea, Nadine, and Mr. McGuire. Nadine, could you get a little closer to Andrea? Deirdre said, gesturing with her free hand. This will be an awesome picture for my website. Deirdre, Mr. McGuire exclaimed, I told you that I didn't want any picture taking during rehearsals. Put that camera away. In fact, you are not allowed to bring it to rehearsals anymore. It's too distracting to the other dancers. Oh, the baloney, Deirdre said. I mean, okay. Whatever you say, Mr. McGuire. She walked over to her dance bag. Andrea scowled at both Nadine and Deirdre. Then she stood up and got back into position. Suddenly, Deirdre let out a scream. Ew! She cried out. What? Now what? Miss McGuire sighed. Deirdre made a face. Someone put silly putty in my camera bag, she announced. Gregory! A bunch of kids cried at once. Gregory! Miss McGuire exclaimed too. Nancy, George, and Bess exchanged a glance. With Nadine, Gregory, and Deirdre, today's rehearsal was turning into a three-ring circus. With Nadine, Gregory, and Deirdre, today's rehearsal was turning into a three-ring circus. I hoped Nadine isn't going to trip anybody today, Beth said. I hope Gregory isn't going to put anything yucky in anybody's dance bag today, Georgie added. I hope Deirdre isn't going to be running around with her camera today, Nancy piped up. It was Wednesday after school. The three girls were on their way to Mr. McGuire's studio for another rehearsal. Wednesday, Nancy thought. That meant there were only two more regular rehearsals today and tomorrow. Before the big dress rehearsal on Friday night, during dress rehearsal, all the dancers would be wearing their costumes and makeup. And Saturday was opening night. Nancy's father, Carson Drew, would be there along with Hannah Gruen. Hannah was the Drew's housekeeper, but she was much more than that. Hannah had helped raise Nancy since she was 3 years old. That's when Nancy's mother had died. George's and Beth's families would be at the opening night performance too. The three girls finally reached Mr. McGuire's studio. They ran up the stairs, their dance bags swinging from their shoulders. I think we are rehearsing the ballroom scene, Nancy cried out to her friends. I love that scene, Beth gushed. It's so pretty. They got to the top of the stairs. Nancy expected to see all the students stretching at the bar and on the floor, but instead, everyone was huddled around Miss McGuire. He looked very serious. Andrea turned around and saw Nancy and her friends. She came running up to them. Nancy, Bess, George, she cried out. Her eyes were shining with tears. Andrea, what's going on? Nancy asked her curiously. My Cinderella slippers are gone, Andrea announced. Somebody stole them. Chapter 4. The First Clue. What? Nancy exclaimed. She couldn't believe the Cinderella slippers were missing. Who stole them? Georgie asked Andrea. We don't know, Andrea replied. She brushed a tear from her eye. I can't dance on Saturday night without my glass slippers. What am I going to do? Nancy rushed up to the crowd around Mr. McGuire. He was talking to Miss Zelda. Andrea, Bess, and George followed. Where did you put them exactly? Mr. McGuire was asking Miss Zelda. Miss Zelda pointed to the storage area in the corner of the studio. Costumes hung neatly on metal racks. Shoes, hats, and other accessories were lined up on shelves. I put them over there last night in their box, Miss Zelda said. The box is still there, but the slippers, they are gone. I have searched the whole studio 3, 4 times. Oh, Monsieur McGuire, what are we going to do? Mr. McGuire turned to the sea of faces. Does anybody know anything about this, Gregory? Maybe Mr. McGuire think this was one of Gregory's practical jokes, Nancy thought. If it was, it's not very funny. Who, me? Gregory exclaimed, looking surprised. I don't know anything, honest. Mr. McGuire sighed. All right, Miss Zelda, please send an email to the store in Paris and see if there's any way we can get a replacement pair sent by overnight courier. The rest of you, 5 minutes of stretches, then we'll start rehearsal. Miss Zelda bowed her head and hurried off. The students scattered around the floor and began their stretches. Nancy, George, and Beth found an empty spot on the floor and sat down. Andrea sat down next to them. Hey, Andrea said in a low voice. The three of you have a detective club, right? The Clue Crew? The Clue Crew, Beth corrected her. Right, the Clue Crew, Andrea said quickly. Can I hire the cooker to find the missing slippers? I'll give you all my allowance for this week. You don't need to pay us, Nancy replied. Our club is all about being the best kid detectives ever, not about making money, Georgie added. And yes, we'll take your case, Bess piped up. She glanced at Nancy and George. If that's okay with you too. Nancy and George nodded. Nancy felt a rush of excitement. She loved solving mysteries, even more than she loved dancing. We'll get on the case right away, Nancy told Andrea. We'll do our best to find the slippers by Saturday. George was busy rehearsing a scene with Deirdre and Madison. Nancy and Bess checked all the shoe boxes and accessory boxes on the shelves one more time. The missing slippers were nowhere to be found. This is so mysterious, Bess said, as she picked up yet another box and peered into it. It's like they disappeared into thin air. I know what you mean, Nancy said, but they have to be somewhere. Things can't just disappear into thin air. I guess you're right, Bess agreed. Slippers, Aunt, where are you? She called out. Nancy sighed. The funny thing was the box for the slippers was still there. It was on the shelf right where Miss Zelda had left it last night. It was a pretty white box with a pink and silver stripes and writing on the side. There's got to be a clue, Bess muttered. She picked up the pink and silver striped box and turned it upside down. Just then, Nancy noticed something odd. Gregory was walking toward the storage area with a Scruffy on a leash. Scruffy had his nose low to the ground as though he was sniffing for something. Gregory was looking at the ground the whole time, too. In fact, he didn't even seem to notice Nancy and Bess. That Gregory acts so strange sometimes, Nancy thought. But Nancy's thoughts were interrupted by Bess's voice. Nancy, Bess exclaimed, I found something. I think it's a clue to the missing slippers. I've never seen a barrette like that, George remarked. Nancy sat cross-legged on her bed and leaned over to take a look. George was holding a silver barrette in the palm of her hand. It was zigzag-shaped. Bess had found the barrette at the dance studio, wedged into a crack in the shelf under the pink and silver striped shoebox. Georgie handed the barrette to Nancy. Then she moved over to Nancy's desk and started typing on the computer. This was one of George's jobs in the clue crew, entering and keeping track of the case on Nancy's computer. Clue, zigzaggy barrette found under the Cinderella shoebox, George read out loud as she typed. Do you think the slipper thief left it there by accident? Bess suggested. Oh, maybe the barrette was there all along and doesn't have anything to do with the slipper thief, Nancy pointed out. George typed all this into the computer. Nancy turned the barrette over and over in her hand. Looks like a Z, she thought. She turned it over again. Now it looks more like an N. N as in Nadine? Did the barrette belong to Nadine? Nancy wondered, was Nadine the slipper thief?